Hi, welcome. Today we are going to be learning how to use Cloudflare pages to create a full stack web app. We're going to be using HTMX and we're going to be using Hyperscript and some Typescript to just generate a server-side rendered application, but that has the asynchronous behavior that we come to expect in web apps nowadays. So let's get straight into it. I'm going to use Wrangler CLI, which is the Cloudflare command line interface. We are going to use Wrangler init to get us started, and let's give it a name. And so what this is going to do is going to give us some options. Yeah, we want Git, package JSON, yes, TypeScript, and no, we don't want a worker because we're going to be using the Cloudflare pages functions instead of the workers, and that will all become clear as we go on. So what Wrangler is doing right now is it's installing a few necessary packages to run its development kind of environment here locally without us having to upload everything to Cloudflare and run it there. So what do we get out the box? Okay, well let's open it up in code. Let's see, Cloudflare demo, there we go. Great. Okay, so we get a TS config with a bunch of stuff in. We don't need the JSX stuff. We're not going to be using React today. I'm going to add some, let's put a base URL in here for source, and I'm going to add some path aliases to make life a bit easier for us. First one will be a lib, and that's going to be located in lib. That's going to be in the source folder. We can have a components one, and we'll have a model. I think that's it for now. Okay, so these are just going to allow us to organize our code base a little bit neater. In here we'll have a lib folder, and we'll go for a model folder, and we'll have a components folder. Spell it right. Okay, so for it to work, Cloudflare needs a functions folder. Now this is going to be our folder structure for our routing, much like you would do in an old school server rendered application, or in a Remix.js, or in one of the Svelte kit or Next.js type frameworks, where you have a routes folder that has all your routing structure in it. It's going to basically work the same way, but using this functions folder. So let's put an index file in here. And we're going to export a method that Cloudflare recognizes, which is this onRequestGet. What this does is it tells Cloudflare that at this location, which is the root location of our routing structure, we have a get. Now this under from the TS config, you would have seen maybe this Cloudflare workers types. So we don't need to import these types. We get them globally in our application, which is really handy. On request get, it's not happy with that because we're not returning anything yet. So what we need to do is return a new response. Again, response is something it understands. It's going to want some DOM in here. Let's be predictable and create a hello world, but we need to tell it that it's HTML so the browser can render it properly. And so that's going to need a content type, and that will be text HTML. And then we need to give it the char set as well, UTF-8. Okay, so when we run this, it should basically, in the browser, it should hit this get endpoint, and it should return us this DOM and render it in the browser as HTML. So the only thing we need now is a script to run. So let's create some scripts, and we'll have a start script. As you can see, I am struggling with this Mac keyboard. So start, Wrangler, pages, dev, and the thing that it wants is a static folder. This will be a folder that we put things like our CSS and images and stuff like that we want to serve statically. So while the functions and the routing here is all dynamic, this will be the static content. So it just needs to know where that is. It also will want some compatibility date in here when we're running the development environment, so that it knows which version we are targeting. But it'll give us that warning when we run it. So let's go ahead and run this. So make sure we are in our Cloudflare demo, and let's run npm start. And as you can see, it is asking for that one, so we will pass that next time we run it. Okay, so we have got this thing running on port 8788. So I'm ready. I was preempting this in my browser, and there we go. We have basic HTML renderer here, creating server-side rendered DOM, but this is not where we want to be. So let's see what can we do. Well, the first thing we can do is we can abstract some of this stuff out. So what I would like to do is grab a template file. I've created one earlier that's going to be in my components folder, and it's called HTML wrapper. So let's go ahead and create this thing in components. Now I want to be a TypeScript file. And all this is let's call this Cloudflare demo. This is just the basic index HTML type stuff that we're gonna wrap everything in. I've got feather icons in here as well, and it's expecting to see that in the statically served directory, along with Hyperscript, which we'll talk about in a minute, HTMX, and it's got some CSS stuff in here that we will sort out in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to grab some of those static things. We've got the Hyperscript, the feather icons, and HTMX, and I'm going to pull them into my. Actually, I'll grab the some of the styling as well, not just the Roboto, and we'll pull them over into our static folder. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I'm going to install Tailwind, and from memory I have to install Tailwind CSS auto prefixer, and I think it's post CSS as well. Oh, and there's one more thing I wanted to have. I want to install something called Daisy UI, which is a Tailwind component library. And so it makes it easier to define things like buttons and stuff like that. Okay, so if we run npx Tailwind CSS, I think, in it, maybe. Yes. So it's created a config file for us. I'm going to grab config from my other. I have some theming and stuff like that I'll grab here and put in here. Right. So all if you haven't done Tailwind before, this is just some theming config that we can expose to Daisy UI and to Tailwind that can set colors and things like that, and some button behavior. Just from another project, it just gives us a head start. So hopefully now we can also create a wee bit of a script in package.json to generate the Tailwind files. So what this will do is it'll take a Tailwind CSS that I'm about to put in here, and it will generate a version, a compiled version of that into our static folder to serve up with our index.html wrapper stuff. And so the only other thing we need is the Tailwind CSS, which is going to go in the root folder. Didn't like that. Here we go. Tailwind CSS. Okay, and that's just got the 3 declarations in there for Tailwind. So hopefully now if we run npm run Tailwind watch, it's built our style CSS and it's got all the Daisy UI stuff in there as well. I'm going to open a new tab in here. Where's my demo gone? Is it in the root? Cloudflare demo. There it is. Okay, cool. So we are about ready to run this again. I haven't made any changes to this yet, and I'm not using the HTML wrapper, but let's just make sure it works. Still, in fact, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the next bit so that we can use this wrapper. So I'm going to create a file here called HTML_TS, and I'm going to export a method called HTML, and this is going to allow us to abstract this stuff here that we're returning. And so we want some DOM like that. That's coming. That's going to come through. So let's replace that with some DOM, and let's just abstract this bit out again to a constant. Oops. There we go. Right. So we can import this into here, and instead of using all this, we can return HTML, and we don't need this guy. So that should do what we had before. In our wrapper, in our kind of helper file here, we want to wrap the DOM in the wrapper. So let's do that. Let's pass the DOM into the HTML wrapper, and let's import the HTML wrapper from the components. So now we should be getting that hello world inside the HTML wrapper, and that'll give us all the Tailwind and everything else. So let's run that. Yes, there we go. So we have Tailwind running, and we have the HTML going through. So what do we want to do with this? Right, okay, well, HTMX is what's going to give us our dynamic functionality in the front end. We could obviously build backend DOM this way, just kind of statically served generated DOM from endpoints. We could be getting data in here and reading stuff. In fact, let's start with that. So let's get some data, and let's get customer data. Get all customers. How about that? Okay. So I'm going to create an async function, and that means that this needs to be async, which it can be in Cloudflare. I'm going to create a model file here and get all customers, and that's an async function, and it's going to return a bunch of customers. Let's do this so that it's actually asynchronous. So I'm going to return a new promise, and it's going to have a resolve, and then I'm going to set a timeout. Okay, and let's set it for 3 seconds. That's a really long time, isn't it? Let's make it 2 seconds. Okay, so when the timeout expires, we are going to return data back, and we're going to return some return an array of customer data. This is Stu and Bob. Okay. We could have some IDs in here as well. Right. So this guy is going to return data. Get all customers is now a method. It's going to return data. And you know, we can use it in a string literal. So now we're going to switch to using these template strings that we get in ES-Next. I'm using this HTML quote here because I have a plugin for VS Code that does HTML and CSS syntax highlighting inside strings, and so if you give it that, it's going to syntax highlight my DOM. Otherwise it's just going to look like a string. So we can start to build this out a bit. Right, I've got some data, so I'm going to break out into this template variable here, and I'm going to map through my data, and each row has some stuff in it, and I'm going to create a element for each row. Let's just do this like this for now, and I'll show you how we use components in a second. But a component is just another TypeScript function that we're going to execute and return some DOM from. Everything is just something that we return HTML from, which makes it all very neat and tidy. Oh, it doesn't know what that is, so let's tell it this is going to return promise. What is it? It's going to be it's an array of records, isn't it? Array. Oh, it doesn't like that. It could be a string or a number. There you go. Okay. So this is getting our data back, and we've now got this row, and so now we can render an li, And let's just put, this is going to look horrible, but let's just put the name in for now. Okay, great. What does that look like? Okay, so you'll see what happened. I've missed one thing out because I've mapped this data. It's actually returning an array of strings. So what we want to do is join them so that they don't have any commas between them when we render them out, like that. There we go. Okay, so you'll see what happened there. We when we refresh the page, we had to wait 3 seconds before the page returned because it's going to get all the customers and then it's rendering the DOM. This is one of the very reasons we didn't like the old way of doing web apps, because you're sitting there waiting for the page to return while all the data's collected before the DOM is created and then returned to the front end. And so this is one of the main reasons why we went for AJAX. Okay, so let's start looking at the HTMX route. I'm going to just clean this up a little bit. So let's create something a bit nicer here. Let's create a div in here, and then we're going to give this a class, a flex class, and let's flex wrap. Let's make this horizontal full. Right, and then these ones can be cards. Let's give it a gap as well between. And then each of these will be a card. And let's give it a background of black. And then this guy, let's get this DOM down here. And here. Okay, so it's a card. We want the card contents. Is it card body? I think it is. Luckily, I've got the snippet. There you go, for Tailwind, so it tells me. Right. Lovely. Right, and let's give this a span, and let's tell it it's text primary, and let's make our hello world look like let's make it white. Okay, let's see if that looks any better. And then okay, cool. I'll have a bit of a margin here. Right, so we haven't solved our problem yet. Let's separate this this DOM out here into a component so that we can pass it in. So let's call that card, and we're going to export it as a default. And we just pass it the row, and the row is, what was it, a record of string maps to string number. Okay, right, so that's our DOM for our card, and we could just pass the card into the map here. Card. Right, and that should do the same thing. Great, lovely. Right, so let's fix our problem. what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a endpoint. It's going to be a post endpoint, and we're still on the index route. Again, it's a Cloudflare pages function. We're going to be async, and what this is going to do is this is going to be the thing that gets our customers. Okay, so what's this going to return? Well, this is not going to return the data. This is probably just going to return something saying loading. And this is going to return all the data for the customers. And so what this needs to return, instead of an HTML, we don't want the whole page with the wrapper. We just want the fragment of HTML. So we're going to create something called fragment, and we're going to return that DOM data. Let's go and create this fragment thing. And let's do it in here in the lib.html, and it's going to just be very similar to this guy, only it's not going to have the wrapper. Right, so now when we load the page, it's just going to say loading. It's going to say hello world. Oh, I haven't saved the file. Let's save the file. I didn't like that. Let's restart. Okay, it's saying loading. It's not very helpful, is it? Because it's not getting this post. So now we're going to use HTMX. So HTMX lets us make AJAX requests from any tag in the DOM. So let's do an AJAX post, and it's just going to go to the index route, and we are going to trigger that on load. So when the page loads, we're going to go and do an AJAX post. Now, what's cool about HTMX is that it's going to get this. It's going to make this post request in the background, and then it's going to handle the AJAX response by default writing over the contents of this tag. So it's going to replace that loading with whatever comes back from here, which is HTML. And this is the beauty of HTMX, is that we're not returning data from the back end, we're returning HTML. So we see loading, and after 2 seconds it goes boom and returns the it returns that lovely DOM that we wanted it to render. Let's hit this again, and we'll see what's happening. So you can see that there's a get request there that's returning our the loading DOM, which has been wrapped by the wrapper. And then there's a post request that's made here, and that's returning the customer's DOM that we've returned. Now, what we can do is have other HTMX methods that are on this DOM, and that can then go and do the next thing that we wanted to do. So any pattern that we want to employ for our web architecture, let's say we wanted to edit this name by clicking on it, we can use Typescript, so that on click we could swap that out for an edit, for an input field. We can edit it, and then when we submit that form, it'll send a put or an update or whatever we want to an endpoint. It can update the data, and it can return us new DOM for just this item here. So it doesn't need to update the rest of the UI. It can just update the thing that we're working on. HTMX allows us to do stuff with out-of-bounds swaps as well. So let's say we wanted to update the name here, but when it's successfully updated, we wanted a toaster to come up from the bottom. we can do all that kind of thing as well. That pattern is a really nice pattern to do for the toaster, and I'll show you that another time. But this basically gets us to a working web app where we can get pre-rendered data, and then we can go off and get dynamically generated data and fill it in our script, in our page here, and get the same kind of experience that we would from a thick client, but just from a few lines of code running on Cloudflare. This is super simple to make live. We just use the same way that we used Wrangler dev to get a live local version working. We'd use Wrangler pages publish, I think is the command. You tell it the static again, and it'll just upload everything. It'll ask you where you're wanting to publish it to, whether you're wanting to publish it to an existing Cloudflare project or to a new one. You'll obviously need a Cloudflare account, and you'll need to be logged in when you're using Wrangler that way, but it handles all of that, walking through it with you using the Wrangler CLI. It's very easy to use. I hope you have enjoyed this, and if you would like to see more of this kind of thing, subscribe and like this, and I will give you some more content on how to generate full web architecture just using Cloudflare and HTMX. Okay, till next time, bye-bye.